The oppressive late summer heat blanketing the Montecito estate showed no signs of relenting as dusk fell over the emerald sprawl of rolling hills and vineyards. Inside the Mediterranean-inspired villa, however, the atmosphere hung thick and tense with a very different sort of suffocating pressure. Within the opulent sanctuary of her private home office, Meghan Markle wore a path across the plush Persian carpet. Her shoulders were drawn tight and high, elegant features contorted into a rictus of anxious consternation as her mind raced in dizzying circles. This simply could not be happening. Not mere weeks after the mournful upheaval and worldwide spectacle surrounding the Queen's tragic passing. Surely even the newly ascended King Charles possessed enough solemn wisdom and grace to avoid dredging up even more unseemly familial controversy in the wake of such a heartrending transition of the crown. And yet the reports trickling in from her dwindling handful of palace moles grew more and more troubling by the day. It seemed King Charles, apparently disgruntled by the perceived breach of protocol surrounding Lilibet's christening and meeting with the late Queen, was digging into official palace records and logs. Specifically, the detailed court circulars, chronicling the coming and going of every member of the royal household dating back decades. According to Meghan's confidants still embedded among the royal staff's ranks, Charles's motives in pursuing this paper trail were murkier than a simple show of administrative due diligence. A more nefarious, damaging agenda appeared to drive His Majesty's zeal for scouring the logs and confirming the veracity of every in and out attendance at the palace and royal events over the past decade or so. And given the complicated circumstances underlying the hazy recollections of a certain American duchess being present for one landmark event in particular, Meghan couldn't shake the dreadful notion of what such a rigorous investigation might potentially unearth. Could it be that, in the wake of her acrimonious royal exit and leveling a series of explosive bombshell allegations against the firm, Charles was now out for reckoning? That the new monarch suspected duplicities and falsehoods in the official record of events as promulgated and spun by she and Harry to the public? The thought of that tangled, shameful web of deceit potentially unraveling under the cold light of hard-proof chilled Meghan to her very marrow. If Charles uncovered what she dreaded most, it could very well negate their entire narrative and credibility in one fell swoop. But surely even he understood the catastrophic repercussions such a ruinous revelation being made public would unleash upon the monarchy. Meghan held out hope the sovereign would think better of dragging such ugly skeletons into the light, if for no other reason than to avoid bringing further lasting scandal and rebuke down upon the crown in its fragile transitional period. Her silent ruminations were interrupted by the ornately carved oak doors to her private study creaking open. She spun about, eyes wild and startled until Harry's familiar form materialized to offer a sobering look of grim solidarity. "My sources at the palace just reached out," he said in careful measured tones, seeming to weigh each word before allowing it past his lips. "Charles is, in fact, directing staff to thoroughly audit and cross-reference recent court circulars from the years preceding our exit. They've assigned entire teams to pore over the logs and events surrounding Archie's arrival, specifically." Meghan's throat constricted as a sudden bout of visceral dread gripped her. So it was as she'd feared. Her past reckless actions were being scrutinized and called into question more intensely than ever before. She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her composure under Harry's steady, expectant gaze. You don't think he actually suspects the truth about what happened, do you?" she managed in a thin whisper, scarcely able to meet her husband's eyes as the words slipped out. That I may not have given birth at the venue claimed in any official record?" She saw Harry's expression flicker with muted flashes of dismay and heartache as the damning implications took shape between them. His mouth worked wordlessly for several weighted moments. I don't want to consider that possibility," he said at last, voice strained with naked emotion threatening to crack through his soldierly poise. "The mere idea of it being potentially true, that you felt compelled to perpetuate such a deceit ion about our own child's origins." His shoulders heaved with a ragged intake of breath as he seemed to tightly wrangle his reaction back under control once more through sheer force of will. "All I know is that if Charles and his staff circulate any findings to suggest Archie's records were falsified, he intends to leverage them as grounds for a formal separation decree," Harry went on in a hollow tone. "Freezing us out of any official family lineage or titles completely and for all time." Meghan swayed on her feet as the full ramifications crashed over her in sickening waves. Blacklisted and ostracized from the royal fold permanently, that had always been an unspoken dread gnawing at the back of her mind, driving her deepest insecurities and compulsions for control of the narrative. But for it to actually transpire because of her own brazenly misguided misconduct and attempts to forcibly reshape the truth about her most precious bond to the institution, she felt as though a yawning abyss of utter despair had opened at her feet. "Harry, you have to believe me, I never meant to mislead anyone about something so monumental," she blurted in a desperate rush, taking an impulsive stride towards him with her hands outstretched in imploring appeal. "At least not in the end." "But there was an intent to deceive nevertheless," Harry cut in with a weary shake of his head. He reached up to pinch the bridge of his nose as if warding off a throbbing migraine. "And the fact is, you did follow through with perpetuating a falsehood by omitting the full sequence of events. Even to me. It wasn't anything so nefarious to start." Meghan protested, feeling hot tears of panic beginning to prick at the corners of her eyes. "At first, yes, I allowed vague hearsay and rumors to perpetuate about having a palace-based birth out of pride and social aspiration. By the time you and I grew serious, I was already in too deep to correct the record, so I just continued allowing it to be the accepted version out of self-preservation." She faltered, heaving a ragged sigh as her voice took on a pleading, desperate edge. "But I swear to you, from the moment Archie was actually born, recording his official provenance was always going to be faithful to fact. It was only the events leading up to that joyous day where I remained economical with the truth to avoid embarrassment." Harry regarded her for a suspended, infinitely tense heartbeat. His eyes boring into her, assessing whether her entreaties rang true or simply compounded the apparent breach of trust between them. "So you're saying the records documenting Archie's haven of birth are sacrosanct in your view?" he asked in a toneless murmur. "That I needn't worry about the court circulars on file containing falsehoods about my son's origins after a certain pivotal point?" Meghan inhaled a shuddering breath and nodded fervently. "Of course, Harry. I swear it on anything and everything sacred to me. The moment our miracle came into this world, documenting his blessed arrival took utmost precedence over any self-serving embellishments on my part." She dared a tentative step closer and reached out to twine her fingers through his own in a desperate bid for connection. "I know I shattered your faith by not being forthright in disclosing my earlier misdirections about the run-up to that day. But you must believe me when I tell you the account of Archie's birth itself is fully truthful and unmolested." Her plea hung pregnant and tremulous in the stifling air between them. Harry continued appraising her features through narrowed, guarded eyes for what felt like an eternity. At last, just as Meghan felt her heart may seize up completely from the intolerable tension, his shoulders slumped in apparent resignation.